I'm pleased to announce our first panel of the conference, focusing on informal and illegal oligarchs and democracy, with our chair, Carlos Melendez, who's a postdoctoral researcher with the De- and Redemocratization Working Group here at the DI, and also a researcher at the Universidad de Lisboa.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel of Informal and Illegal Oligarchs in Democracy. My name is Carlos Melendez. I am delighted to convening and chairing this discussion today. I would like to briefly introduce our panelists, Zarai, Toledo from the Pontificia, Universidad Catolica del Peru, and Erdem, Yoruk from Koç University. Zarai Toledo Orozco is a political scientist from studying resource governance, informality, and comparative political economy with a regional focus on the Andes. Her research focuses on the political power of actors leading informal economies, particularly those around natural resources, such as minerals, forests, or coca leaves. She has worked on projects related to supply chain improvements and mining formalization in Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Ecuador, and her work has been published in scientific journals like World Politics, Latin America, Politics and Society, and Extractive Industries and Society. Erdem, he is the director of the Center for Computational Social Science at Koç University. He's a professor in the Department of Sociology at this university and an associate member in the Department of Social Policy and Intervention at the University of Oxford. He serves as the principal investigator of the ERC-funded project Emerging Welfare. And also other projects, ERC-funded Politius project as well. These projects has focused on computational social science methods to understand social behavior and social policy. As we have been exploring throughout this conference, the overarching question guiding our conversations is how does excessive wealth harm democracy? But our panel today will delve into a specific dimension of this question, focusing on the impact of informal and illegal wealth on democratic regimes. Often, we consider the threats to democracy. When we consider threats to democracy, we focus on authoritarian elites and over attacks on democratic institutions. However, it is crucial to recognize that democracy can also be undermined to more subtle yet equally powerful social pressures, particularly those arising from informality. To frame our discussions, I want to start with a quote of Guillermo O'Donnell, an Argentinian political scientist. He said that democracy presupposes a state that has both the capacity and the willingness to enforce the law equally to all actors in society. We want to link the discussion of political regime with the discussion of the state in this sense. This quote sets the stage for understanding how informality can erode democracy. By informality, actually, we mean sectors of society that operate largely outside the reach of state regulation and taxation. These sectors, theoretically marginal, are no longer unnecessarily correlate with poverty because they represent a significant proportion of economy and population in many, many countries. We will be exploring how states' failures, whether through a lack of effective redistribution of a crisis of political trust, how they can create and how can we create opportunities to manage these informal and illegal wars to amass power. When the state fails to provide for its citizens, people may turn to more pragmatic leaders offering clientelistic benefits. Whether we are talking about established mafias seizing political control, as the context in Turkey, for example, or informal power brokers accumulating capital from the ground, as in Peru. These actors pose a significant threat to democracy. In this panel, we were talking about the hyper-concentration of capital in context of weak states. This can take the form of organized crime, drug traffickers, but also the so-called artisan miners or large-scale smuggling operations. These illicit fortunes operate largely outside the reach of the state oversight, creating fertile ground for corruption, undermining the rule of law, and ultimately eroding the legitimacy of democratic institutions. I am very excited to hear the perspective of our panelists, and please, Zarai, start with our presentation. Thank you so much.
The microphone is taller than I am. Can I remove it? Okay, that's easier. I want to start by thanking the Institute for the invitation and to participate on this great event. I want to bring the perspective of Latin America, and I'm very happy I got to hear in person the presentation of Dr. Catherine Pastor, because you would see the similarities and also the differences in the Latin American case. And I want to talk about the increasing power of an illicit elite in Latin America. So I want to begin by showing you this map that shows that in the global south, most countries are resource rich, as you probably know. In the graph, the darker the color, the higher the dependence on commodities, natural resources that have high value in the international market. And so during commodity booms, when commodity prices rise up, usually states invest and change laws to favor foreign investment. So most of these countries have grown during the 2000 commodity boom as a result of the arrival of extractive companies, for instance, mining companies. So they made a great effort to seize the boom. But hand in hand with the expansion of formal extractivism, large-scale companies, we've also seen a new player in town. We've seen the rise of illicit extractive economies. And by this, I understand the unregulated economies around the exploitation of natural resources, around the exploitation of commodities. I'm thinking about illicit mining, deforestation, illicit fishery, and coca leaf cultivation. With the commodity boom, these economies that have been in the Andes, in Latin America forever, pre-colonial times, they expanded, they became very complex, they started to sell more to the international market, and we started seeing the rise of hierarchies. In particular, we started seeing the rise of an illicit extractive elite, those that could fund these activities, those that could take it to a next level, those that could profit the most. One particularity of illicit extractive economies that separates them from other illicit activities is that extractive activities are tied to territories. This means that they have to be in one specific place. They cannot move. And this allows them, when they expand, to develop strong networks with their dependents, with the people that they hire. Take into account that these economies take place usually in rural areas. These type of economies, in many cases where there are no other productive alternatives, become the only opportunity for several populations, the only choice for people to work on. So they develop loyalties with rural communities. But because they are also tied to specific territories, they need the state to help them seize boom times. They need the state to help them expand their activities. They need new regulation, they need laws to profit, to expand their businesses. How strong they are or how powerful they are? Well, I've been studying for quite a long time the case of illicit mining. And in the Andes, in Peru, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, and Colombia, illicit mining accounts for between 40 to 85% of the total gold exports. The deforestation business, specifically deforestation business operators, can make up to $6.4 million in the Brazilian Amazon per case, meaning per area that they work on deforesting. And in the case of illicit fishery, the activity results in revenue losses in South America estimated to be between 4.3 to 8.3 billion annually. So we're talking about big, big businesses. I wanted to also show and add this graph of deforestation in Bolivia, so you can see the difference between authorized deforestation, that's the line, and the rest, what's up, it's illicit deforestation. So you can see that progressively with the boom, illicit extractive economies are rising. Now, when we think about illicit activities, the first thing that comes to mind is probably all these stereotypes that you have seen in Netflix and shows that talk about cartels, that talk about mafias, that are clandestine, that are trying to run away from the state and have their own regime secret clandestinely away from the state. And if they participate in politics, it's only to, I don't know, avoid policy implementation, to keep the state away, to keep to keep their operations secretly. But my research and my work, I've spent the last 10 years working in rural areas with the leaders of these economies, so I've seen their expansion, shows that that's not often the case. Usually there are, or progressively, there are certain conditions, political conditions, that allow the leaders of these economies, the elite extractive economies, to openly participate in politics. So there is a political context that enables an open participation of these elites in politics in Latin America. Maybe the context will sound familiar to you, but some of those conditions are high levels of inequality and corruption scandals that in Latin America have contributed to the discredit and weakening of political parties. For instance, in Ecuador and Peru, no party in recent elections has secured more than 50% of the votes. In Peru, for the presidential for the next election in 2026, we have 34 candidates. 34, and with parties that have no longer than 1-2 years of creation. So we have a problem of representation. In extreme cases, as in the Andes, diminished parties have become the norm. And what I mean by diminished parties, I mean parties that do not have the means to campaign, that have limited capacity to mobilize voters, to reach all the territory. It is very difficult that they can expand in many cases outside of capital cities or urban areas. And most of the parties lack a programmatic agenda and do not have a fixed constituency that can keep them accountable. So what I find is that these conditions allow the leaders, the elite of illicit extractive economies to participate in politics. They will become the ones that fund the expansion of these activities because I mentioned it before, they are tied to territories and they develop networks. They can provide parties with voters. They can provide them with a constituency, and they will be the ones influencing their agenda. So what I find is that progressively we have gone from illicit extractive economies that at the beginning only impact policy implementation, but now, because of the conditions I stated, they have become agenda setters and veto players. That means that they do not only impact implementation, but they can change the laws. This is what I found an interesting connection with the previous talk with the keynote speaker, is that the leaders of these economies have realized that the best bet they can make, that the best deal they can make is to change the rules. Not only to prevent the implementation of those rules, but change the rules of the game. So they have started to lobby directly with legislators. They remove their dependence for pressure. And where there is interest convergence, where they share interests with the formal sector, I found that they lobby together. For instance, the deforestation business in Peru and in Colombia works hand in hand with the illicit sector. They coordinate to pressure legislators to open more areas, natural reserves, to be part of the deforestation business. So what are the, just to finish, what are the implications of this presence, of the presence of these elites for democracy? Well, we have a new and accountable player with a strong political representation and ties to the international market. I wanted to add the connection with the international market because international demands is what empowers these elites at the local level. The demand for commodities, for gold, for instance, for natural resources, for fish, is what makes them powerful at the local level. And this is also what has given them the resources or the means to have political representation. So just to give you an example, the head of Congress in Peru, the head of Congress was the lawyer and the representative of the largest illicit gold mining association. He is the one in charge of deciding the rules to regulate that activity. Regulation, in fact, of these economies has become detrimental to party interests and continuities. No party wants to say out loud, I'm going to regulate illicit mining, because it can mean to lose a lot of votes. It can mean to lose the votes of all the people that depend on this economy. And, of course, as a result, there is less space for contestation and representation of populations that are impacted by such economies. For example, after the peace agreement in Colombia, illicit gold mining is the activity that is displacing more local communities in rural areas. And yet, this issue has no representation in the political arena. We do not have strong parties in Bolivia, in Ecuador, talking or speaking or defending the interests of those displaced. I'm gonna stop here. I think I said a little. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will talk about Turkey, another terrible case. I'm sure you are following the general trouble that we are having, so I don't want to summarize everything that we experienced during the last 20 years, but I want to focus on this illicit capital and what I call the mafia populist welfare state in Turkey. Over the last 20 years, Turkey has become one of the textbook cases of what I call a mafia populist welfare state. And in this model, three forces: illicit capital, political polarization, and generous pro-pool social welfare, social assistance, do not clash, but they cooperate. Together, I argue, they form a single logic of rule. Two great scandals reveal how that logic works. The first arrived in December 2013, when leaked phone tapes placed senior ministers inside a $1 billion gold for oil kickback scheme. The second erupted in May 2021, when the exiled far-right mafia leader Sedat Peker turned YouTube into his courtroom, accusing current cabinet members of running cocaine from Latin America to the port of Mersin in South Turkey, accusing current cabinet members of running cocaine, and in addition to dozens of other criminal gang activities. Sedat Peker narrated these events as an insider, as a central actor. And both stories, both events dominated headlines at home and abroad. But neither shook the electoral dominance of the governing Justice and Development Party. Why? The answer should begin with numbers. After the 2013 leaks, a Conda survey found out that the support for the Justice and Development Party among households earning below 2 minimum wages, generally the poorer parts of the population, the support for the Justice and Development Party did not fall. It rose. And during the same period, the share of state budget devoted to pro-poor social programs jumped tenfold, from roughly $1 billion in 2002 to more than $9 billion by 2016. So the real puzzle is not citizen tolerance of corruption, but the puzzle is how criminal money is turned into popular consent. I see here a four-stage circuit. First, extraction. Rents pour in from cartelized construction, sanctions busting, narcotics logistics, and padded municipal tenders. These revenues live in legal gray zones. Their owners need cover, both political and moral. Second, laundering. Cover arrives through institutions that straddle private and public life. And the key actor here is the Social Assistance and Solidarity Fund, created back in 1986. The law's purpose was explicit. Blend official funds with voluntary donations, quote, under the guidance of the state. So they're expecting some donations from the private sector. Money entering this fund disappears from the treasury records and from parliamentary scrutiny. Yet it feels like philanthropic charity. Parallel streams flow through Islamic Vakıf foundations, municipal aid societies, and corporate social responsibility schemas. Third, redistribution. Once washed, the money re-emerges as targeted benefits. Cash transfers, callbacks, grocery vouchers. Distribution runs through neighborhood party branches, district governors, and mosque networks. Eligibility rules are loose on paper and elastic in practice. All of these social assistance programs are officially declared to be programmatic, rule-based, computerized, but the design of these programs allow for such a huge degree of discretion that allows a large degree of political manipulation. Especially in Kurdish districts and in the Kurdish region, where rebellion is a live memory, benefit intensity is significantly higher. Elections sharpen this effect, and my field interviews record fourfold jumps in social assistance budgets just months before a close vote. Fourth is legitimation. Citizens experience these benefits not as impersonal rights, but as personal favors. That fosters what can be called a moral economy of gratitude and fear. Gratitude for today's help and fear for tomorrow's cut-off. At the national level, the government tells a double story. It is pious because it channels Islamic charity, and it is developmental because it shields the poor in hard times. Corruption allegations are recast as conspiracies by foreign actors or hidden elites aiming at sabotaging this redistribution. As long as the four-stage circuit spins, revelations about corruption do not stick because regular welfare payments protect the government. Several feedback loops hold the system together. Polarization narrows the information field. Citizens interpret scandals through partisan lenses. The opposition was extremely excited to watch these scandals. It was a like enigmatic moment. So I remember I was waking up at 7 a.m. on Sunday to watch the release of Sedat Peker videos. But it was just an empty gesture. It didn't lead to anything that the opposition was expecting. The state fine-tunes the mix of welfare and coercion. Plenty of gift when cash is abundant, heavier policing when it is not, or both simultaneously in different localities. Firms that profit from the inflated contracts feed a share back into political funds, securing future deals. Therefore, this triangle, illicit capital, welfare, and loyal brokers, form a stable equilibrium, but only while the rents keep flowing. Theoretically, the mafia populist welfare state fuses three classic insights. From Gramsci, it borrows the idea of hegemony. Rule is durable when it offers material concessions. From Charles Tilly's protection racket, it borrows the logic of paying for safety from dangers the rulers help to create, economic precarity and legal uncertainty. And from the welfare state literature, it borrows the power of benefits to embed citizens in new social contracts, even when those contracts are truly clientelistic. What emerges is therefore not a leftover from pre-modern charity, but a distinctly 21st century adaptation to neoliberal globalization. This was one of the starting points of my recent work. In the welfare state literature, the expectation was that neoliberalism would undermine welfare state provision, the welfare state. But the opposite happened. And in the countries that I'm talking about, the largest welfare expansion occurred in the very period of neoliberalism. So, I mean, the understanding of this puzzle passes through understanding this contentious politics. The system is therefore rent hungry. If you cut the cash, the magic falters. Brazil offers the warning. There, to populism, Bolsa Familia and corruption coexisted until austerity after 2014 started the patronage pump and the legitimacy collapse. Turkey's own 2022 currency crisis and the ongoing economic crisis showed early tremors. As real wages fell, Ankara had to rush out one of energy subsidies and cheap credit just to hold the line. But this does not impede the failure of the mafia populist welfare state. Hence, the votes for the AKP declined, the popularity of an opposition leader peaked, and that leader jailed. For scholars and practitioners of democracy, the message is quite straightforward. The legitimacy can be bought with redistribution, financed by corruption, and the loyalty it buys is real. Yet that legitimacy is fragile because it depends on continuous access to informal and illegal capital. Studying welfare without tracing the money that funds it misses the core of the problem. Let me close on that note. As long as invisible wealth can be converted into visible social assistance, populist leaders will carry an electoral shield against corruption scandals. Breaking that shield takes more than simply revealing corruption. It means blocking the fiscal laundering that turns dirty money into benevolent control of citizens. Until we do, many democracies in the global south will remain theaters of Pablo Escobar shows held together by loot, gratitude, and fear. Thank you very much.
Okay, before starting some questions from the audience, let's have a little chat about some of the reactions about your both great presentations. I mean, in Latin America, in Peru, in Ecuador, Bolivia, and also in Turkey, these countries have gone through very harsh neoliberal reforms, right? But at the same time, in most of these cases, the state is historically weak. So we have seen neoliberal reforms in contexts where the state has inherently weak. And so the chances for redistribution are challenged in a double way, not only based by the economic reforms, but also by the state, by the history of the state. However, one aspect that has not been considered by the people that shape or imagine these neoliberal reforms was about the laws, the framework of capitalism in these cases. So I would like to continue discussing this topic, analyzing the interaction between weak states, neoliberal reforms, and how these two aspects have shaped the emergence of mafias from below, or has settled the possibilities of a state that have been controlled by mafias from above, the top-down procedures, mostly in Turkey, and a bottom-up process of a state taken by the mafias in the case of Peru. Zarai, please.
Thank you. I want to say that first of all that I'm shocked, and I'm pleasantly surprised about the contrast of the two, because, as you said, one is one develops from the bottom up, and the other one is top down. I don't know if I will call this what I describe this illicit extractive economies as mafias, precisely because they have developed from below. It's not that they have to buy loyalties, as in the case of mafia. They were raised, they grew with the people. You see the case of many, for instance, indigenous people that have become the leaders of these economies. You see them defending that. I think here the issue or the key difference is that for these people there is a practice that is deeply ingrained in their culture, like illicit mining, and that, because of a global demand, has empowered them and is the only alternative. So we see a very different trajectory. I wanted to clarify that. But the other thing is that, yes, we tend to think that weak states cannot do anything or are the door for all the problems as the ones we have described. But in the Andes and in Latin America and highly dependent resource countries, we have made progress. We have made progress regulating large scale. In Andean countries, we now have different ways to measure conflicts around mining, for instance. We have developed different institutions. We have developed environmental standards. I'm not saying that they are perfect. I'm not saying that they are adequate, but we have done that because there was an incentive. We wanted to attract foreign investments. So yes, that might sound like a weakness, the fact that we have weaker states, and certainly political representation opens the door for the empowerment of illicit extractive economies. But to me, that doesn't mean that we cannot do any effort, though we're incapable to regulate these economies. In fact, in comparative perspective, in Latin America, in the Americas, we have cases where the state has tried to pursue different strategies to regulate this sector. In Bolivia, for instance, the state has said, these economies feed people, employ people. It'd be better for me as a state to collaborate with them, to help them to improve so they can continue helping the economy. Whereas other cases in Peru have said, no, we need to demonize the activity, we need to exclude them from any type of representation. We have the case of Guyana that has developed a constitution to include illicit miners, to help them formalize their activities. So there are different strategies to try to address these problems. Yes.
Thank you. So this was a great question. I would respond with my response would include two components. First of all, I do think that so we cannot call all of these states as relatively weak states, because the countries that we are talking about in the global south are also they also have variations. Especially the countries like Turkey, Brazil, India, Russia, Hungary, I mean, the countries that are called emerging market economies, and especially, I mean, these are the countries that I have focused on. So they have relatively higher state capacity than the rest of the less developed countries. For example, there's a difference between Bolivia and Brazil. There's a difference between Syria and Turkey. And that difference has reflected on the development of the welfare state. The countries in question had already developed a social security-based welfare systems until the neoliberal period. I mean, during the post-war period, so they followed the developmentalist welfare path, and they they covered almost half of the population with social security benefits through unions, through social, like formal sector workers. And on top of that, during the neoliberal period, they expanded huge not pro-poor, but social assistance programs, and they reached almost a universal coverage of the welfare state, almost, I mean, the first time in their history. So, I mean, I call this welfare, like family, the populist welfare state family, as opposed to like other Western type, Esping Anderson type welfare state regimes. So this required a certain level of state capacity, which already out there, a certain level of capital accumulation, but also certain levels of grassroots mobilization, political competition that would create a driving force for welfare expansion. And it's like disproportionate targeting to certain groups. And so the critical thing is, like within that populist welfare state regime, the populist one, some of these countries are acting like a mafia. And in Turkey, to understand Turkey, you should change your mind. We are not talking about the government. We are talking about the mafia. I mean, for Charles Tilly, every like states and mafia, so they are in the same spectrum, but the spectrum in Turkey is much narrower, so the targeting of the poor people becomes not only a choice but a necessity for this mafiatic government and illicit capital matrix, I would say, because they have been going through different challenges. This government has faced a lot of challenges so far, from Gezi protest, from this Fethullah community coup and economic crisis, the Kurdish unrest, and they have survived almost everything until very recently. And it is not only the welfare state, but social policies played a really critical role, because in addition to like religious fundamentalism or nationalism, these social welfare programs created a very strong loyalty base among the poor. And if the poor is not a minority in countries like Turkey, they are the majority. And if you secure the loyalty of the poor, then you secure your government, you secure your votes. And the opposition in Turkey until very recently relied only on middle class votes, but the recent change in the opposition also relied on and changed the policy towards more left wing and towards the informal working classes, and that also accelerated the shift of votes from government to the opposition, and eventually led to the imprisonment of the opposition leader.
So we have variation in state capacity, different levels of state capacity, but we have seen in these countries also accumulation of money. I mean, accumulation of capital, and this have an impact on society, right? You are sociologists, and I want to ask you first, now that the relationship with the state, but with the effects of these mafias organized that have taken the state, and the case of organizations like informal organizations with money coming from below, in the case of Latin America, what are the consequences of these two processes in the society? I mean, who are the new rich? Who are the new economic groups? Who are the new economic elites in these countries? And what are their regime preferences? Are they thinking these new rich, these new economical elites, do they have like different economic preference? Because we have learned from the classics, from Barrington Moore, that we need a middle class in order to secure democracy, right? But we have new middle classes and we have new elites, economic elites. What are their preferences in order to build a legitimate and strong democracy? Please, Zarai.
Thank you. What an interesting question. And in Latin America, especially in resource-rich countries, so all of them, I guess, for a long time, literature, especially in the case of countries whose economies depend on minerals, there was a literature talking about a state capture, arguing that large-scale companies, corporations, international corporations that had, for instance, mining projects in Chile, in Peru, in Colombia, in Mexico, they have captured the states. They've already concentrated so much power that they can change the rules, that they can prevent regulation, that they can prevent the rise of environmental standards, and that was almost a consensus, no? Because we're highly dependent on them, they set up the rules. And the scholars were so focused on this type of factor, the legal corporations, that they forgot to look inside the territories, no? That they forgot to look what was going on in rural areas. And in rural areas, we have seen the development of what I called illicit extractive economies that when they grow, when they expand, have also political interest and have the means, the resources, and the networks to pursue such preferences. What I find now that I'm studying what do they lobby and what do they talk to and what do they argue when they reach legislators is that they want to choose the areas where they want to be regulated. It's very interesting for me that their argument is not, I don't want any state preference. Their arguments are, I want to choose in which spheres, in which areas states should be present, when I should be regulated and when not. Even formalization, for instance, is not something that they escape. Many illicit extractive economies want the title of being formal, but with no standards. They want the label of, I want to be called formal mining, but I want to keep polluting and do whatever I want, no? So they negotiate the terms of inclusion to the state, they negotiate the terms of their labels, and they want to negotiate the spaces of regulation. And I say that they don't want to escape the state because they need the state. They need the rules. They need a state presence. They need schools. They benefit from certain basic state presence, no? Which I think this is why it's so interesting to see how these actors negotiate every step of their activities, no?
That's an excellent and very difficult question because it has a lot of complex dimensions. The descriptive answer, so the new rich is mostly focusing on sectors like construction, mining, energy, and interestingly, the defense industry. Erdogan's son-in-law, he is leading this company producing drones. And so they are selling a lot of, especially to Ukraine and other places, but anything. The conflict between the government and the opposition, the government and the previously Kemalist army, they all reflected an underlying conflict from a Marxist perspective, from underlying conflict between different factions of capital. Turkish state dependent on an old money until the 2000s, based in Istanbul, secularist, like Western-oriented, old money. So Erdogan's party represented the interests of a more provincial, like capital, based in like other cities in Turkey, producing export-oriented goods, and they actually these two types of capital entered into a really harsh conflict. And after, I mean, the latest example is that TÜSİAD, the organization of this like old money, the leaders of TÜSİAD were taken into custody for a couple of days for criticizing Erdogan. Therefore, so there's a really nice book by Tarık Taçil, Elite Parties, Poor Voters. This is the story of India. So the governing party supported or representing the interests of the bourgeoisie, but being supported by the poor. So the book tells how social programs are subcontracted to civil society organizations or pro-party networks in such a way that the distribution of this money does not harm the material interests. It doesn't cost much to capital, but it creates huge legitimacy for the entire system. So you serve for the bourgeoisie, but you are being supported by the proletariat in the end. So this is a really, really wonderful picture, and this is a very strong picture. And what I'm talking about is this bourgeoisie is also a mafiatic bourgeoisie, and the proletariat is mostly an informal one.
Very interesting. So now, please, I would like to have some questions from the audience to our panelists, please. Yes, there is one here. Please remember to briefly introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Peter Mihai. I'm an economist from Central European University, Vienna. And my question is very simple and short to Erdem. It was very interesting what you elaborated about the development of a welfare state on mafia grounds. But can you support this with some kind of numbers in a way as Zarai did to show that these things are important enough to influence? Because at the first hearing, mafia type of revenues are minuscule relative to the need of the poor. So it doesn't sound too convincing to me that the Turkish welfare state, to the extent it exists, and probably does, it is really supported financially from mafia type of revenues.
Yeah. Can I? Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm not arguing that all the social welfare budget comes from such donations from capital organizations, and but so it constitutes an increasing part, and the welfare state social assistance programs, some of them are centrally funded programs, some of them are municipally funded programs, and a larger part is taking place through social solidarity networks, informal networks, civil society organizations, and these civil society organizations are using this money very effectively. With the use of small money, they can receive huge amounts of political loyalty from the poor. Therefore, it is not only that the money is coming from the mafia, but the social solidarity and social solidarity fund that I was talking about, it was built specifically on this cooperation between the central state and donations. Its logic relied on that. Therefore, so I cannot provide you with numbers. because I was like developing this idea after we decided to talk about this illicit capital and like legitimacy on this panel. But it turned out to me that this may be a fruitful research topic, and I'm planning to explore more like numbers that would also convince an economist.
Thank you. Over there. And then,
Álvaro Morcillo, Research Affiliate, Democracy Institute. My question goes to both of you, but perhaps more to Dr. Toledo. You have been using a very formal concept of law, of legality, but the size of these illegal sectors you are describing, particularly in the Andean countries, are so large that one is compelled to think in terms of more informal ideas of order, so rules we haven't been approved by a parliament. And here comes my question. Are there alternative orders which regulates these illicit activities, this illegal mining, etc.? If the sector is so large and you said that it's complex with long supply chains, there could be the case that there are rules which are not state sanctioned, but they are there. And the other issue I wanted to raise is, do these illegal entrepreneurs, which seems to be quite large, or maybe associations of illegal entrepreneurs, because they are illegal, but they can create associations nevertheless, do they also provide public goods? It's something which we know from the north of Mexico. Do they provide welfare to the people in the area? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's my book project, so get ready. Buckle on. Yes, so as I said, many of these economies are deeply rooted in the territories, in rural areas. And in fact, they have developed several informal rules. Informal rules for the redistribution of the profits. Informal rules for who is in charge of extracting the mineral, in the case of gold mining. Who is in charge of even washing the clothes of the miners. Where do we get the implements and the tools for mining? There are all these systems deeply rooted in rural areas. They change depending on the type of mining, whether it is alluvial, whether it is in quartz veins, and the same can be applied to fishery, the same can be applied to coca cultivation. There are informal rules and there are informal agreements too in cases of disagreements. In rural areas where state presence is weak, people will rather engage in these informal agreements, even if they're not fair, but they would rather engage in disagreements directly with the leaders of these economies because they think they can have some leverage. The state is away, the state is far, and probably doesn't care, no? But when they expanded, when they became more complex and more hierarchical, we see the development of an elite that has different preferences, that has accumulated enough capital and land to ignore whatever informal deal was done at the local level. So that's why I said something very interesting for me of these illicit extractive activities is that they are tied to the territory, right? So they cannot be hidden. They cannot go to other places. And this is exactly why they need to engage with the state, because they're visible. There are these famous pictures from the Amazon, from the air, where you see the Amazon and you can see all the mining camps. It is visible. It is there. No, that's why they need the state, and that's why they engage with legislators to legitimize their activity. No, sometimes under the label of formal, but they continue their own practices. So yes, this is a crucial moment, I think, especially not only in the Andes. This is huge in Brazil, no, where we see the clash between informal, local rules, previous agreements, with the rise of these elites that have concentrated enough resources, enough means, enough land to change the game. No?
One answer? Okay, but I have a follow-up for you in this case, because Alvaro asked about the size, the magnitude of the informal sector, and to have an idea, in Peru, for example, the labor force, the 75, 72% of the labor force belongs to this informal sector, which is, I mean, 3 out of 4 workers are in these parallel economies. What's the numbers in the case of Turkey? 1/3 only. Okay. Okay. Edge, I think she has one question.
Thank you so much. Ejaz Bey from Democracy Institute. I have a question for Erdem, if possible, about post-2023 Turkey. Because I think one interesting phenomenon is that there was once a presence of intra-party divisions within the AKP regarding these transition into what you call welfare populist mafia state. There were some party cadres who opposed this corruption, these illicit networks, this clientelism, which over time have been purged. Some of them established, new parties. Some of them just went silent. But now, since 2023, just like you described with the major municipalities being in opposition hands and those extractive tools being, practically neutralized, we see suddenly AKP clinging to these key bureaucratic figures who came into our lives again in 2023, like the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Interior, who at least on paper seem dedicated to fight these networks that you describe, keep Turkey out of these gray lists, establish trust. So I was just wondering, do you think this suggests some sort of self-correction, even though it's out of desperation, or is this merely a temporary adjustment? Thank you.
Definitely second one. I mean, Erdogan is a wonderful leader, so he's the most pragmatic, flexible person that I have ever seen. I haven't seen him in person, but he is really, he likes to play with macro and microeconomic dynamics, the rate of interest rates, the value of the Turkish lira, unemployment, social assistance, everything to maximize the survival of the regime. Before the 2023 elections, you remember, almost all rational economists were calling for increases in the interest rates, but he was saying that he developed his own theory of inflation and interest rates. He said inflation, the rate of interest is the cause, and inflation is the result. He had his own heterodox theory, and people made fun of him. But in the end, he was correct, because he was able to win the elections by pouring money, and so he actually messed up the economies. But in the end, so he's still the president. I mean, it depends on which function that he's trying to maximize. Currently the Israel-Iran war, the things in Syria, the opposition leader, and he's talking to Trump. He's everywhere, and it is really difficult to understand the function that he's trying to optimize or maximize at the moment. I definitely do not think that Turkey, because of the finance minister, Mehmet Şimşek, he's trying to find some money from Western capitals, acting like he's the rational spirit, but these are only temporary, pragmatic steps.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really fascinating. I have a question for both of you about the elites you're describing, which are different from each other as well, I think. The first is, when do you think they are kind of in a process of formalization from kind of entrepreneurial individuals to dynasties to maybe corporations in the making, or whether you think they need to remain in the shadows? and also the ways in which they are plugged into transnational networks, both in terms of selling their goods, but also what they do with their wealth. Usually people like this at some point try to diversify. So yeah, I'd be really curious to hear a bit more about the nature of the elites and the direction that you think they are going in.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So it depends truly on country. It's country by country case. As they expand, the elites, as I said, the ones that have concentrated enough land, and I say land, but in general I could say the area, because sometimes we're talking about the sea, right? So with illicit fishery, so the area where they have concentrated the means in the areas, they engage with the state to try to seize boom and have favorable rules. Sometimes, in extreme cases, they will aspire to get to the label of formal, just so they can operate with no issue. But in reality, they keep doing the same. But in other cases, for instance, in Ecuador, where they're also facing the rise of several criminal bands, some of these bands are going after these economies. And where criminal bands lead these economies, the dynamic is completely different. No? They will try to stay away from the states, they will try to fight the state. So the path really varies. I think when you were asking what is the direction that they are taking in cases such as Peru, Colombia, and Bolivia, and Mexico, they want as much flexibility as possible. So, for instance, something that I found very interesting is that they can help funding parties, right and left wing, because that maximizes their chances to influence policy. No? Regardless of who wins, I'm going to have a say. I'm going to be able to influence policy. And they're not really looking to diversify their activities because natural resources are already extremely profitable. The logging business is tremendously profitable. Gold keeps going up in prices. Gold has been rising from 2015. It's up. It's the best thing. Gold is so profitable that it has displaced the coca leaf business. In Colombia, most of the coca leaf growers are moving to informal mining because it just pays more. And the new problem of Colombia, in fact, is gold mining, and coca leaf has taken a minor role. Thank you.
Thank you. So from Polanyi, we learned that markets are always being created by the state, so they are not external to each other. But here, in this case, markets and certain capital groups are being created by the state through mafiatic means. That's why I'm referring to this concept of mafia. A lot of examples also revealed through this corruption tapes by Sedat Peker or the others. So they are explicitly telling how the property like factories or ports of certain capital groups are taken over by government allied capital groups by mafiatic means, like by force, by arms. And we are talking about people, they are kidnapped, they are killed because they are, the son of an earlier prime minister under Erdogan. So he was shown to have a ship bringing cocaine from Venezuela to Turkey, and they are bringing this to a port, not Mersin, but Kuşadası, and that port and the hotels surrounding it were taken over from another rich guy to this guy. Things like that. And so, therefore, the first thing is that there is a really mafiatic takeover of land. It's not a competition between different capital groups, a competition which is always biased by state intervention, but we are talking about something beyond that. And second, if you talk about the natural course of the events, these capital groups, the new money originated from peripheral regions of the country. They were doing constructions and textiles, and they were interested in global markets. And some people said they were they had their own Protestant ethics, Islamic Protestant ethics, like the Weberian ones. But in the end, so with these mafiatic and state interventions, they became huge organizations, construction companies, and land has been commodified significantly, rapidly in Turkey. This created a huge market. Dams, electricity, energy projects, and also this capital also became very international. They are building cities, they are building hospitals, airports everywhere. Anywhere a war happens, then the Turkish construction capital enters. In Syria, they said, okay, we can rebuild this. In Palestine, okay, we are into that. And I'm sure they are waiting for Iran for them to rebuild. So this is a business, destroy and then rebuild. In terms of the diversification of their operations, I think the interesting case is about the old money. The old money feels threatened, and they are trying to internationalize their operations. They are escaping from Turkey and buying companies in Europe and in other places. And Ülker, for example, they were an old ally of the capital. Now they have bought United Biscuits from England. So this creates an internationalization of Turkish capital as an unintended consequence. Maybe you can call it a diaspora capital, Turkish family. So there is a new business in London, business asset management. Families trying to buy assets, investing in startups and AI firms to save their money, because they feel that their money in Turkey can be taken over a night.
Yeah, before Andrea's question, I actually was thinking about, or one complementary about, what are the reactions of the traditional elites? I mean, in your case, you mentioned that they are looking abroad Turkey. What are the reactions of the traditional elites, the traditional economic groups? What are the reactions to these emerging new rich elites?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually working on a paper exactly on understanding the determinants of the position of the all elite regarding these activities. And what I find is that there is a lot of variation depending on whether legislation impacts them in the same way or not. So when it impacts them in the same way, as in the case of deforestation, I find that they end up collaborating. They push legislators together to weaken regulation. They collaborate at the local level to coordinate strategies to, again, exert pressure over legislators. But when regulation affects them differently, as in the case of mining, because there is legislation specifically for large scale, and very different one for informal one. They work in different types of deposits. In those cases, when legislation affects them differently, we see a resistance from the traditional elite. So we will see news and public letters of the all elite saying, please, the state needs to regulate the sector, we need to prevent the expansion of illicit mining. We would see some resistance. So it really depends on whether they collaborate at the extraction process and if they benefit or are harmed by the laws.
Andreas, please.
Thank you. I would ask you to elaborate on two issues you have been touching upon. One is tolerance, the other enforcement. So kind of the naive question, you've started talking about that, why do states tolerate these activities? Kind of in Turkey it seems, okay, it's a product of the states, these are really creatures of the state. But in these other situations, in the Amazon, etc., is it complicity? Is it weakness? Is it a scheme of exchange? Is it the threat of social rebellion? Is it the profitability of these enterprises? So that's one of set of questions. And the other, in terms of enforcement, kind of the whole, I understand, kind of the whole art of coding capital in law, kind of the ultimate purpose is that you can mobilize the state to enforce your claims. But when you're illegal or informal, that's much more difficult. I've lived in Mexico for a long time. There are criminal organizations. They basically have their private armies to enforce their claims and to expand their businesses and to regulate competition, etc. So, and mafias usually also do that. They use private violence to regulate the market. So that's my question. To what extent are they able to mobilize kind of public organized violence to enforce their claims? To what extent do they do so, I don't know, with their private armies?
Thank you for the question. Every time I ask a governor or a mayor in Latin America, in Ecuador, Bolivia, in Colombia, why do you allow this expansion of either deforestation or mining or even in illicit fishery? Every time I ask this, they told me, what would I feed the people with? Like, if I enforce regulation, what are these people going to eat afterwards? Because we have to understand that rural sectors do not usually have an alternative, a productive alternative, at least not in the formal economy. For many of these people, this is the only alternative. So for a local authority to enforce the law means to face the opposition of the voters. It means to lose the possibility of re-election. It means to become a threat to the people. So local authorities definitely do not want to enforce the law. But as the activity has progressed, as these illicit destructive activities have increased, I find that not only they tolerate the activity, not only they forbear for enforcing regulation, but in many cases they support the activity and become the spokesman of these activities. They are the ones, they go hand in hand with the leaders of these activities to talk to Congress, to talk to even the executive and say, we need to find a way to regulate this activity or make them formal or allow their continuity. Because they find that this is what it's, because these activities are funding others. In many of the areas I work on, illicit miners were the ones that built the roads, that literally built the roads between town and town. So there is a high degree of dependency that creates loyalties and prevents the enforcement of regulation. Now, the second question that you ask is, how about the coercive arm, if they use it to enforce their laws? I find it interesting that in many cases they don't have that. And why would you do that? Why would you rely on that if you have the other alternative? I mean, you have the numbers. You have a high level of dependence. And this is why I was trying to describe. I was trying to describe non-coercive strategies that they use to change policy. For example, lobbying with legislators. And even for a congressman, it makes sense to support these activities because in Andean countries, specifically in Peru, congressmen represent each region. You want to be re-elected. You want to continue in the political game. You need to respond to your constituency. So it makes sense for a congressman to also allow the continuity of these activities. So they have, in context of weak political representation, a window to push for their interests in the legal way, to participate in politics and to push for their interests openly.
For the second question, I think the first question and its answer is already answered, but I would give you a similar answer. There is no need to own a private army, but for a different reason, because you already have the state's like coercive apparatus, and this is I'm not talking about the police or the army, but I'm talking about the judiciary. So it is a really interesting thing in Turkey. So this electoral autocracy has been established. I mean, without killing anyone, without torturing anyone in Turkey. So I mean, we are not threatened about like killings, or physical force, but rule of law is practically demolished, and the arbitrariness of judicial decisions are extreme. Everyone, my mother thinks that she can be arrested because we are talking about Erdogan on the phone. I mean, that level of fear is the result of an arbitrariness, a series of arbitrary decisions. Like yesterday, another very mainstream but anti-Erdogan news like journalist, one of the most famous, he was jailed because he said something. I mean, he criticized Erdogan on YouTube, and that includes the Istanbul mayor and the mayors of different cities in Istanbul, journalists, politicians, capitalist leaders. Everyone feels that they can be arrested because any prosecutor is just acting on the interests of that mafia state apparatus. And you never can estimate the interests, immediate interests of this apparatus, because we are not sure that they know their own interests at this point. So, I mean, if they are doing rational calculations and arranging judiciary operations accordingly, maybe they are just doing everything just because they can do everything. So this is also a possibility. But in that context, I mean, this illicit capital and mafia do not need any private army or killings because they are subcontracting it out to the state.
I want to include in this analysis another actor. What about the social protest? I mean, people protest generally because they are asking for redistribution of wealth, right? This is one of the reasons why people protest. So are people, I mean, the regular Peruvians, regular people in Turkey, they get along with this kind of new structure of how economy and politics works? Are they okay with the mafia controlled by controlling the state? So how is social protest can we include in this analysis?
So this has very, depending on the stage of the expansion of these economies. I mentioned it before that I found that at the local level, people were rather engaged in negotiations with the leaders of these economies than to go to the state because they know the state will not do anything. So they would rather negotiate even an unfair deal. But then, as the activities or these economies grow, depending on who's leading or who is the elite, we will see different types of claims. When the activity has expanded and we see an elite from the area, people will more or less tolerate it. But when the economy is captured by criminal groups, as in the case of Ecuador, we will see an opposition, because this is when we will see the presence of coercion. And people run away from coercion, they feel threatened. That's when we will see protests. In general, in the Amazon, in Brazil, in Colombia especially, opposition exists from indigenous communities, from Afro-Colombian communities that want to be the ones leading the activity, or They want their territories to be used differently. But their voices are undermined because there is no political representation and because the other side has all the tools, no? As you were saying, the game is already, the playing field is already skewed. So your voice is less likely to be heard, no? I think economic dependency on commodities here is the key, no? The commodity dependency has been what has undermined protests for the large-scale sector, and it's doing the same for the illicit sector. No?
So on the one hand, state is shaping these welfare provisions according to social protests, to design in such a way to contain social contention. I mean, this is my entire research agenda. But as a response to your question, so people are also taking out the streets. I mean, significantly after the imprisonment of Istanbul mayor, millions of people, literally millions of people, were out in the streets for more than a month, and this was led by university students, and it was an enormous mobilization. But like every mobilization, it has cycles, it has declined, but it can jump again, and you cannot say that. I mean, this is why Turkey has never yet become a Russia, because the opposition is really strong. I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, despite all this mafiatic welfare complex, still around, I would say, 1/3, I mean, 2/3 or 60% of the population is strongly against the government. And we are talking about millions of people ready to take out the streets. And I think this is why the government has chosen this way towards autocratization. That's not their choice, but that was a necessity, because by any democratic means, the way is, they are in the end of the game.
Great, thank you. We still have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, please.
Maybe the question is naive, but Dr. Toledo, because you insisted that the exploitation of natural resources is so lucrative, so profitable, then the question which comes to my mind is, if it's so profitable, why can it not be regulated in a way that permits communities to survive and have some profit? So is there not a middle way of keep on exploiting natural resources and having them regulated? In particular, the environmental aspect can also be beneficial for the communities because they won't have problems with contaminated waters, etc.
Thank you. There is no other activity that can grant states so much money legally, that can grant the state so much money without such little effort than the extraction of commodities. Like, this is the perfect way for a state to have immediate cash. For right-wing and left-wing governments, democracies, autocracies, in the history of Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa, the exploitation of commodities is what gives you a lot of cash immediately. Preferably when it's done formally, because they have to pay in advance for the concession, in the case of mining or oil or gas or other commodities. And that means that the interest of the exploitation of commodities will go above any other concern. Life, environment, protection of communities, of minorities. There is nothing that is more important than that, no? Especially in cases that are highly dependent. No? This is a story of Venezuela, for instance. No? When oil prices were up, everyone is happy, we can deal, we can manage with agreements. When prices are down, conflict always sparks. No? So yes, in theory, it makes sense that you will protect those resources. But the fact that these are countries that have not even covered their basic needs, and there are different interests, people just want, and governments in general, wants to or prioritize the exploitation of these resources, preferably legally through large-scale companies. But what I'm arguing is that this dependency has also fostered the expansion of the illicit sector, which does the same, but it does not contribute to the treasury. It instead redistributes the wealth locally. I think this is what empowers them, that it gives them immediate profit to the local level. But in both cases, the environmental side, it's at the bottom of priorities, or the protection of communities. Is how lucrative it is what places priorities.
Final remarks, Erdem. I don't know if you have some final remarks before finishing our session, please. Something that you want to emphasize or to final thoughts?
I don't. How do we fix this? How do we fix this?
How do we fix
We don't want to end this talk only outlying problems, no?
I mean, for me, the solution usually should come from bottom. I mean, people's mobilizations but I mean, people have mobilized in the case of Turkey. People have shown their support for an alternative political leader, but this person was jailed, and the protesters are jailed. So we are not talking about a real oppression. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but yeah, let's see, I would say.
Do you have an answer for the Peruvian case?
I wanted to end with, I mean, not for Peru. It's a way more. I think it's extremely complex. But generally, in Latin America, for me, a good start is to diversify the economy. It sounds so basic, but it is the way to begin. The power comes and the issues come from the high dependency on commodities. To think about any policy alternative, to think about any type of political regulation, to decrease the power of these elites, you need to offer something to the populations that depend on these economies. And for that, you need to diversify the economy. And the other issue is what you were saying. You need to empower bottom-up resistance. Presidential systems in Latin America, especially in the Andes, as I was saying, they win office with a really low percentage, no? In elections that do not give them the majority in Congress, or where it's highly divided. And so it is very difficult to create good laws, strong laws, with strong support. You need to win office with a strong constituency, with a lot of seats in Congress to change the rules of the game. I think those are the two things that for me will be relevant.
Thank you so much, Zarai. Thank you so much, Erdem. It was a pleasure to have this conversation, and thank you so much for your participation as well.